Good afternoon to all of you in New York and Minnesota, and welcome to all of our guests from around the world. I am Steve Altman, Director of the DHL Initiative on Globalization here at NYU Stern's Center for the Future of Management. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this joint event with the University of Minnesota's Carlson Global Institute, and my honor to introduce our guest, Cargill Board Chair and CEO Dave MacLennan, as well as the moderator of today's event, Professor Myles Shaver of the University of Minnesota. To provide brief introductions, Dave MacLennan has served as CEO of Cargill since 2013. He joined Cargill in 1991 in the company's financial markets division. In the company's Minneapolis and London offices. He later moved to Geneva to head Cargill Energy, and then worked in Cargill Protein and Food Ingredients before becoming Chief Financial Officer in 2008 and Chief Operating Officer in 2011. Prior to joining Cargill, he began his career as a runner, phone clerk, and risk manager in the futures and securities sector in Chicago. He holds a bachelor's degree in English from Amherst College and an MBA in finance from the University of Chicago. Myles Shaver is a professor of strategic management and entrepreneurship at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management, where he holds the Curtis L. Carlson Chair in Global Strategy. Myles is a fellow of the Strategic Management Society, a recipient of the Irwin Outstanding Educator Award, and author of the book, Headquarters Economy, Managers, Mobility, and Migration. I'm also grateful to Myles for serving on the External Advisory Board of the NYU Stern Center for the Future of Management. Before we get started, I would just like to mention that the format of our event today is a fireside chat in which Myles will start by asking Dave a series of questions. Then, after starting the conversation with his own questions, Myles will turn to questions from the audience. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the event using the Zoom Q&A function, and Myles will ask as many of your questions as our time permits. Without further ado then, let's get started. Myles, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. So Dave, welcome. Good afternoon. Nice to see you virtually joining us here at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School and Stern School of Business at New York University. For a little bit of background, our audience today is mainly students, faculty, and alumni from both schools, with guests from other universities and companies in various industries. So to get us started, I'll make the observation is that probably almost everybody in viewing this has eaten food that Cargill's been involved with in some way. So whether it be farming, processing, or transportation, but many are probably not familiar with Cargill and its businesses. Can you start by giving us a little introduction to Cargill and the role that it plays in the global food system, and also just the scale of its operations?
Sure, Myles, and good to see you too. And I assume if you're in Minnesota, you're enjoying an unusually warm first day of November. The forecast for Minnesota, for Minneapolis, where Myles and I are, is in the 70s, which is unheard of, but it also is indicative of climate change and climate volatility. But nonetheless, it's a beautiful day here in Minnesota. And thanks for having me. My brother is an alumnus at Stern, and so I certainly have a personal connection there as well. As you said, Myles, people probably don't know much about Cargill. We're privately owned, we're family owned. So we are owned by the Cargill and Macmillan families. We were founded in the year that the American Civil War ended, 1865. So we just celebrated our 157-year birthday. And basically, our statement of purpose is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. We started out in Conover, Iowa, and our headquarters is now in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but basically started out W.W. Cargill of buying grain from farmers and getting on the railroad to ship it east, where the population of the economy was growing dramatically, but there wasn't yet a great connection from the Midwest of the United States to the east relative to food and agricultural production. Since then, we've migrated to a company of 160,000 employees. In our most recent fiscal year, we posted about $162 billion in sales. So if we were a public company and we're on the Fortune 500, we'd probably be somewhere in the top 20. But again, being privately owned, we don't qualify for the Fortune 500. Our businesses include, we are an animal protein company. So we are the third largest beef producer in the United States. We are a large producer of poultry internationally. We're also the third largest producer of turkeys. This is a busy season for our turkey business. We don't have many branded products. We do have some, but that's our animal protein business. We also make feed and nutrition for the animal feed industry. So we are a large feeder of creation of feed, I should say, for salmon, shrimp, and other species as well. We have a food ingredients and bioindustrial business. So we make cocoa and chocolate. We make starches and sweeteners. We make edible oils, cooking oils from canola, from palm, from soy. And we also have a bioindustrial business. So from agricultural products, we are making products to replace petroleum products. And then finally, our original ag supply chain, that's kind of the original business of Cargill, which is buying crops from farmers, either storing it or putting it on a rail car, a barge, a truck, or an ocean-going vessel to get it somewhere else in the world to where it's needed, where it's going to be consumed, or processing it, say, from wheat into flour, from corn into cornstarch and corn sweeteners, from soy into oil, and so forth. We also have trading activities. And so all of this in a 157-year-old company. And to your point, Myles, you can't really prove it, but probably in any given day, you've consumed something that Cargill has either produced or it has had a role in getting to the market or producing. For example, as I mentioned, we feed salmon. We also Kettle One vodka. That is our alcohol. It's not our brand. We're not in that business, but there's a very fine line between ethanol and between potable alcohol, and that is our alcohol in the bottle, and some other products as well. I mentioned our turkey business. We do have some branded products. So we're in the ag, food, and supply chain with our statement being to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dave. I mean, as you allude to, there's nothing so fundamental for all of us like food. And with Cargill being involved in, just that range of activities, it was great that you could give us a sense of that scope. How about before we dive in a little bit more in our conversation on globalization, how about I turn it a little bit to you? And, maybe would you be willing to talk about, personally, what are some of the defining moments in your journey from an MBA student? Because we have a lot of students on the call through the various financial and other operational roles at Cargill to, your role as CEO. Anything that's, any moments that come to mind or any advice that you might want to give to those who aspire to a similar journey?
Sure. I have worked for two other companies other than Cargill, which makes me unusual. I'm the 9th CEO in Cargill's history. And I think there was one other that had worked for an NGO for a couple of years before starting his career at Cargill, but all the prior CEOs had been here their whole career. But as I was introduced very generously, I started in Chicago in the Futures and Securities Exchange. And that's where I kind of got hooked on markets and instantaneous price discovery. I got my MBA at the University of Chicago, and partly it was I felt survival because my undergraduate degree was in English literature from Amherst College. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do with that degree if I want to go into business? So that's where I got my MBA in finance, one of the reasons that I did. But I would say that I've had kind of a liberal arts approach to my career, meaning I tried different things. As I mentioned, I was in the futures and securities industry in Chicago. I came to Cargill, also in the financial markets business. I was at a company called Piper Jaffray for a while, but then in my Cargill career, I worked in our protein business. I worked in our food ingredients business as a way to learn the company, but also as a way to learn what I enjoyed and what did I feel that I was good at. So for me, a lesson was try different things. Don't be afraid of change. Embrace change, whether it be changing your employer or changing your actual job content or your work content. And then I think one of the keys to a successful career is resilience. Not all years are good years. Some years are tough. Some years you might not achieve your objectives or may not feel that you're advancing as quickly and up the ladder the career ladder. And certainly I had years that I felt like that. But I think, having a long-term view, especially if you find a company, as I did with Cargill, that has a long-term patient view that rewards good performance, stay with it. And I sometimes feel that people are too quick to say, well, this isn't going the way I want to. I'm going to go try and find something else. And I would say be patient with your own career. I would also, in terms of resilience, as I mentioned, Myles, I would say in a 42-year business career, the last 2.5 years have probably been the most challenging of my career, between COVID and inflation and the war in Ukraine, which has significantly impacted Cargill. I think personal resilience is really important. And I do believe that one aspect of success in leadership is pattern recognition. You need to be able to say, oh, wait a minute, I learned about this in grad school, or I remember seeing this happen in a prior year or a prior career stop. And the fact of the matter is, the last 2.5 years, there's been no pattern. There's been no precedent. This is the first pandemic that I've lived through. And I would imagine everybody in this call, I don't imagine that there were many people alive in the pandemic of 1918. But you've got to have the resilience to keep on learning and to figure things out quickly, even though there may not be a precedent or a pattern for what is happening at the moment. And certainly the war in Ukraine, the invasion by Russia, this is the first situation like that I've dealt with in my business career, but certainly in Cargill's, in my role as Cargill CEO. So I think learning, resilience, looking for change would be the three components that I would point to as one of the reasons that I've been fortunate enough to get to this position in my career.
Great. No, thank you, Dave. And also thank you for highlighting, this has been a couple difficult years, and really the importance for resilience and those types of things. So let's take us back into the discussion, or sort of the topic for today is sort of, the notion of globalization and global strategy. Can you give us a sense of just how globalized is the food system? Because I think it's something that, maybe some people know, but a lot of people don't. And how are those globalization levels trending?
Yeah. The food system, as we found out in COVID, is globalized. I mean, for example, the top three markets for exports of American grain for the American farmer: Canada, China, Mexico. And so, to our relief, the U.S. signed USMCA, the revised version of NAFTA, a couple of years ago, and that's some normalized resumption of grain trade into China has resumed, and those markets need to stay open in order for the American farmer to continue to be successful and have a market for her or his products. Cargill is a globalized company. And as we think about our own evolution from a company that started in 1865 in Conover, Iowa, to where we are today with a presence in 70 countries and sales into 125 countries, we have built our business model on the globalization of the supply chain. There certainly are regional components, but particularly as it relates to the grain trade out of South America and North America. In order for the world to be fed, in order for 8 billion people on the planet to receive ag, food, nutrition, there's got to be open borders. And frankly, to the second part of your question, Myles, that's what keeps me up at night, or one of the things that keeps me up at night, is the end of globalization, or using food as a weapon, as we have seen being done, whether it's an economic weapon or as a military weapon. Creates a very volatile and fraught world economy and world situation for the vast number of malnourished and undernourished people of the world. So we're certainly seeing what could be described as the end of the latest stage of globalization. Myles, you read these kind of topics. You're a scholar and you understand these things very, very well. But, the world goes through stages of globalization, and one could certainly say we're going through a stage now where we're uncoupling or deglobalizing. I think as it relates to food, agriculture, nutrition, that is touchy moment. The borders have to stay open as it relates to the movement of food and agricultural products.
Yeah, well, along those lines, I think when I was out today and listening to the radio in the car, it was something like the vast majority of countries in the world are food importers, right?
Yeah.
And so really this notion that you've alluded to is some of this uncertainty with respect to globalization. Is that why people are sort of arguing that there's a growing consumer concern for a food crisis?
Yes. I mean, if you look at it, just stay with the basic staples. So soybeans, corn, wheat, canola. I mean, there's some major growing regions of the world. Obviously, North America, Canada and the U.S. primarily, but also Mexico. South America, Brazil and Argentina in the primary concentration. As it relates to wheat, you've got Australia, you've got Russia is the largest wheat producer in the world, and Canada is one of them, and so is the U.S. So when borders break down, or when trade breaks down, it ripples through world economies. So just yesterday's news that the Russians may end the opening of the grain corridor sent wheat markets skyrocketing. Now they've settled down a little bit today, but the inability from the major ag and food producing countries like the ones that I mentioned and regions, Russia, Ukraine, the breadbasket of the Black Sea, if those products can't move, that's what's got markets jittery. And stocks are also very tight. So we follow very carefully how much food is in storage, what are stocks to usage ratios. We've been fortunate in that we haven't had we've had droughts in the major growing regions of the world. Australia, for example, is experiencing extreme moisture right now. But as you and I know, Myles, being here in Minneapolis, we had the driest September in Minnesota history. Water levels in the Mississippi River are dropping daily to the point where it's disrupting traffic to get products out of the American farm belt, the American heartland, down to New Orleans, down to the ports, onto ships, and ocean transportation to get to where they need to be processed and consumed. And so disruption, whether it's through closed borders, military intervention, political intervention, and then the impacts of climate change can create a very severe situation if we're not careful.
Yeah, and then just to also continue on that line of thought as we think about the implications. So, the type of crisis that you're talking about in terms of these staples. So who really, then are there certain countries that are more at risk? Because like you say, my guess is the producers, it's right there. But with exports and imports so important for different countries, are there areas of the world you think that are extremely susceptible to this?
Well, for sure, you start with Africa, where they're especially in the east, the Horn of Africa and the east coast of Africa, which is so dependent on Russian and Ukrainian products for their survival and for their nutrition. I think you can name any number of emerging economies and emerging markets. But if you just look at the sheer numbers in terms of population in Asia, where almost half the world's population lives, they depend on trade and they depend on the importation of agricultural products. But I think the one that you'd point to quickly as being the most the most vulnerable is the nations of Africa, where they don't have a developed agricultural economy and depend on imports. For example, we import soybeans into Egypt and crush them and make them into cooking oil and then soybean meal, which feeds the livestock industry. And they also depend on imports of Russian and Ukrainian wheat and corn in Egypt. And so it's not only the North African region of Africa, but also particularly the whole east coast of Africa as well. So there is vulnerability, and it depends. There's some statistic that there's enough food to feed the people of the world, but getting it to them, whether it be through infrastructure or whether it be through political means and open borders, is what prevents it from getting it to where it's needed. But it is as I've said, it's a fraught situation today.
Yeah. So along those lines, the recent crisis, and that made you at Cargill sort of reevaluate, or are there ways in which you've revisited your global strategy with respect to this? I mean, you've talked to some of the touch points, but I'm sort of curious, what does some of this mean to Cargill right now?
It's a good question, and it's a timely question. It's a fortuitous question because there's been more, I'll say, external or exogenous events in the last 3 years than there have been in the prior 30. I heard a historian speaking recently and said, think about the last 30 years, let's pick a number, call it 20 years, that, there's been unprecedented economic prosperity for developing countries, obviously. There's been relative peace. I mean, there's been a few, points of conflict or military conflict. And then what we've seen with what's happened in Ukraine is unique relative to the last 30 years. And this historian went on to say, but what's happened in the last 3 years is more indicative and more typical of world history. And in fact, the last 30 years of relative prosperity and relative geopolitical stability was unusual. That was the exception more than the rule. And so from our standpoint, in terms of strategy, we've been in business for 157 years, as I said. 2 world wars, the Great Depression of the 1930s, the Great Recession of 2008, numerous economic crises. I think for us, if you change your strategy every time there's the kind of events that we've had, whether it be pandemic or Ukraine, or certainly significant inflation and these supply chain disruptions, you're going to be, you've got to have a strategy that endures through this uncertainty and endures through the ups and downs of geopolitics, economics, and uncertainty. And so for us, we feel that we've been in business for a long time. We have a diverse portfolio. I mentioned the products that we're involved with. And then ultimately our purpose of nourishing the world is one that will always be a necessity and always be a values-based purpose and values-based strategy. Certainly you look at, we had a significant business as recently as, I'm going to say 25 years ago in Venezuela. And when Chavez came into power in 1999, and since then, we tried to stay as long as we could, but ultimately we pulled out of Venezuela. And we're a significant investor in Russia. We intend to stay, feeding the Russian people as well as feeding the African continent with getting products out of Russia into Africa. But ultimately, you have to keep a careful eye on the long-term economic and political stability of the countries you're doing business in and make adjustments along the way.
Yeah, no, I think as you allude to there, and, even as you described, I mean, employees in 70 countries doing business in 125, it's not like you're doing business in Canada, the US, and Western Europe. Cargill's had a long presence in a lot of countries where geopolitics is something you've dealt with all the time, I guess.
It is. And as I mentioned, in 157 years, we've been through this kind of uncertainty. And so you've got to have the long-term vision. And we're fortunate. We're blessed with patient private capital, which says that, we're going to stay. We're going to be committed to our values, and we're going to be committed to nourishing the world. And we're going to see through what happens in the short term and not just panic or bail out when kind of uncertainty occurs, which inevitably does occur through cycles of history, as I alluded to.
Right. So, let me ask you this. So, as you mentioned, the company's stated purpose is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. So can you then talk a little bit to sort of then how you think about sustainability or other ESG types of priorities at Cargill?
Yeah, I think it's the number one issue confronting the planet, first and foremost, confronting business organizations, businesses, private sector, public sector, and certainly confronting Cargill today. And not only today, but for the decade of the 20s. I was just talking to somebody recently that when I first started in this job in 2013, one of the key topics was GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and the view that they're bad for you, that people shouldn't consume them. And it took up a lot of airspace in certain circles. In fact, GMOs are a tool of sustainability and has been one tool and largely developed, as you know, by Norman Borlaug at the University of Minnesota, that has helped farmers and agriculture feed the world in the way that it has and scale up agricultural resources. So I would say, thank goodness for GMOs. But today's topic, which today's major focus on sustainability was not as much a focus in 2013, but it certainly has rapidly evolved. It was a focus, but it is the topic of conversation, certainly in our company, in ag and food production, but in all companies. It is, I think, incumbent upon all of us to change our business practices, to develop and build sustainability into our strategy. We're making significant progress. We are focusing extensively, yes, on regenerative agriculture, and it all begins with farmers, stewards of the land, stewards of food production. But there isn't a day when we don't devote a significant amount of our leadership time to thinking and developing strategies and tactics around building sustainability into our supply chains. And so,
can you describe, what is regenerative, agriculture? And
basically, regenerative agriculture is things such as double cropping. So getting, more scaling up your land usage, cover cropping to prevent land erosion. A little more difficult here in Minnesota because the growing season, once traditional harvest is, the growing and harvest season from say May until October, once it's over, as you know, we get hard freezes. It's harder to do, but it's creating soil health through double cropping, no-till. So you're not stirring up carbon from the soil, which has been sequestered just through photosynthesis, just through the natural production and growing of crops. And so it's using the land as a carbon sequestration, but using it more efficiently and preventing erosion. And so we are investing capital and time and working with farmers to promote regenerative agriculture and promote regenerative agricultural farming practices as a means to creating a more sustainable ag industry.
Right. And I can imagine also, and you alluded to it also, that, we've talked about drought, we've talked about other sort of shocks that way. Climate change is obviously something that's on the forefront of many people who think about agriculture. I would guess it's also on the forefront of what Cargill thinks about also.
Well, it very much is, Myles. And I mentioned the impacts of drought, driest Minnesota, September in history, water levels in the Mississippi reaching levels where it's becoming increasingly more difficult to transport ag products down the river to the ports in Louisiana to be able to get on ocean-borne vessels. Hurricane Ian in August of 2021, right at harvest season, where we lost one of our loading and storage facilities down in the Mississippi River, down near New Orleans, and we weren't able to move grain for about 60 days. It was knocked out by Hurricane Ian. So the volatility events due to climate change is not just about, are we going to get enough rain in order to nourish the crops where they're grown, but are we going to have disruptions, whether, river levels around the world to be able to move crops onto the oceans in order to get them to where they're needed. So it's a disruption due to climate change, focusing on sustainability is an imperative for all companies, but particularly as it relates to the production of food.
Yeah, and so again, maybe continuing, the line of thought you were just talking about GMOs and other things like that. I'll have to admit, after moving to Minnesota and getting a chance to interact with companies like Cargill and other agribusiness companies in town, that, I'm blown away by the level of technology and innovation in the ag sector. And if somebody thinks it's my grandfather's old tractor in Alberta, they're missing something. So can you talk a little bit about, innovation in the ag business and maybe even how it relates to Cargill, and, what maybe even a couple things that you think people might find surprising of where technology is going in this space?
Yeah, I mean, there's no greater technician, statistician, or climatologist than an American farmer. They have to. It's an outdoor sport. They've got to deal with climate volatility and changing conditions in order to produce their crops, to increase their yields. You won't find a harvester or you won't find many pieces of farm equipment that don't have some type of technologically enabled weather forecasting system, soil mapping system, geo mapping system that tells them where they're getting their best yields or where to process and where to harvest. So the American farmer, in terms of technological innovations in the last 10 to 15 years, has been pretty amazing. I mentioned regenerative ag, which is another form of innovation, but I point to three things that Cargill's focusing on. Number one is alternative proteins. And so the beef industry, the animal protein industry does create greenhouse gas emissions. And so we are focusing, as many companies, not many, but several companies are, on producing alternative forms of protein, plant-based pea protein, and cellular production of protein as well, that won't use as much water resources and won't emit greenhouse gas. Secondly is smart manufacturing. So having efficiency in our factories and our plants. I mentioned we have 160,000 employees. About half of them are plant workers. And so you've got to have innovation in terms of robotics, artificial intelligence, in order to have more efficient manufacturing. We saw with very firsthand experience in COVID that when we had 6-7 people on a line in a facility knocked out, and a beef plant typically operates with about 800 to 900 people on a shift, on a 9-hour shift. So do the math. A beef plant has anywhere from 1,800 to 2,000 people. So when you knock that plant out, typical beef plant in the U.S. feeds about 23 million people. So when you shut the plant down, you take a lot of food off the shelf. So you've got to have innovation in terms of, I mentioned smart manufacturing, automation, in order to give you a backup system. And then you get into things like public policy on immigration. The labor shortages in many of our facilities have been severe over the last couple of years. And then finally, and I mentioned it when I talked about what Cargill's business model is, bioindustrials. So replacing petroleum products, whether it be in a binder in asphalt or a binder in insulation, replacing, formaldehyde or petroleum-based products with oilseed-based products. It might be in people's makeup, or it might be in, as I mentioned, asphalt and insulation. So products that come from canola or other oilseed products, bio-based products, even the fluid in electrical transformers, which has typically been from petroleum products, that we make to replace it with ag-based products. So there's a lot of innovation in ag and food going on. There's a statistic that in terms of venture capital and investment capital, when I started this job in 2013, there was probably about $2 billion a year coming into this space. Today, it's over $30 billion a year. So there's a lot of capital coming in and a lot of innovation being created that will help create more sustainably produced food, but more efficiently produced food.
So do you think the numbers you give are great because it helps scope the problem and that. So do you think that some of this increased interest too is just more a broader understanding or acceptance of understanding how important ag is, or is it always been there and it's just sort of the technological fringe where investors are in, or is it a bit of both? What do you think?
I think it's a bit of both because, as I mentioned, the statistics from 2 billion over 30 billion, ag and food, I would say 2013, I'll overemphasize it or over dramatize it for impact, for effect. Kind of a sleepy industry. People are focusing on technology or mobility solutions or telecom or healthcare. But now, number one is I think it's a factor to your point, Myles, of There's a lot of capital looking for a place to go. Number two is an industry that didn't attract as much investment and venture capital as it did as other industries did. Number three is, I think, with COVID and with exposure of the fragility in some of the world's food and ag supply chains, an appreciation of, wow, in developed and wealthy countries, people go into grocery stores, you have your pick of whatever you want to eat whenever you want to buy it. And all of a sudden, when we had shortages or disruptions, I think there was a recognition of, gee, what goes into, what are all the steps and processes that go into getting food onto the shelves? This is more complicated than anybody imagined. And then an appreciation for, we've got to have more efficient and resilient supply chains. Food supply chains in the US didn't break down thanks to the American food and ag worker, farmers, people in the plants. They were there every single day. And I sometimes lose a little bit of patience with office workers who don't want to come into the office, or who only want to come in one day a week. We have plant workers and food and ag workers, not just food and ag, factory workers. They don't have that option. They came in every single day to make food products, or to whether it was make technology products or medicine. And so that's what we depend on. But I think those are the reasons that, Myles, that is a combination of appreciation for the complexity of the supply chains, a lot of money looking for a place to go, and opportunity.
Yeah, no, and as you say, a real way to make a difference also. So
exactly.
I'm going to open it. I see that the audience has been great and have been, sending in some questions. But before I move to their questions, let me ask you one final one, and that's really related again to a global scope of Cargill, of like, as we've mentioned, operating in 120 or operating employees in over 70 countries. How does being so international and having employees in so many places shape how you view things like diversity, equity, inclusion at Cargill?
Yeah, it's, for me, in my job in the 9 years, it's been an imperative to improve and increase DEI in the company. We have set very specific time-bound and statistical goals relative to our population overall, and we have significantly diversified our leadership team. So when I joined the leadership team as CFO in 2008, we had 8 North American and European men. Today, we have 6 women, 7 men, 2 of color. But also from a diversity standpoint, we diversified in terms of people's backgrounds and where they worked before they came to Cargill or while they worked at Cargill. The company's leadership, employee populations have to look like the world that we serve. But more importantly, it brings a diversity of thought and of practice. It brings a diversity of thinking and of experience that makes a company better. It's a value that we embrace as a company, and I always feel and have believed in Cargill as a values-based company. I think it's been a competitive advantage for us, and it's why we've been in business for as long as we have been. It's why we have continued to be able to grow as a privately owned company, is because we've embraced the values of doing the right thing and putting people first amongst other things. And DEI fits very much into that. So when I think if you were to ask people in Cargill, do they feel there's a strong and visible commitment from the leadership team to DEI? I would like to think that they would give you a strong and clear yes. Obviously, we've got 160,000 people. Not everyone's going to say that, but it certainly has been something that for me, has been a foundation of what I've tried to get done in my time as CEO.
Yeah, and as you talk about, you talked about building out the international, really an international senior management team, or that. I'm curious, between the pandemic and between our adoption of new technologies, was it easier, or was that more difficult to communicate across the global expanse of Cargill over the last several years?
I think it's become easier because number one is there's a lot of different ways you can communicate. And I think back with kind of a smirk on my face to, using Skype as a platform, which was kind of with all due respect, I guess, to Microsoft, it was kind of a ridiculous platform. It crashed or it was, and you look at the functionality of Zoom and Teams, amongst other things, you couldn't, I shudder to think, what would it have been like 10 years ago, 5 years ago in a pre-Zoom, pre-Teams world to have had to work remotely? We closed the office on Friday, the 13th of March, 2020. Everybody in offices went home and we kept on going. I thought we were going to crash our IT systems. This is never going to survive. We made it. So, but it's become easier to communicate, Myles. But I think just forgetting for a moment or pausing for a moment on the means of communication, I think the form of communication, especially for top leadership, it becomes critical. One of the adages that I like is an organization takes on the qualities of its leadership over time. That which you do and which you role model is the most powerful symbol of what you believe in. So I mentioned half our leadership team, 6 out of 13, is female today, and two are of color. And that, to me, the power of that message to the rest of the organization is more than me standing up in front of a town hall saying, I believe in DEI, I believe in diversity. We've implemented that at the top ranks of our company. I think you've got to lead with your actions, but I also think, there's also an adage, in terms of you've got to say something 7 times with 7 different means to 7 different audiences or something like that. I've got it wrong, but the point is repetition of a message and consistency of a message is also as important, I think, as the means by which you communicate and the actions by which you take to demonstrate your belief in the words that you state. Your words mean nothing if you don't follow it up with beliefs, a belief system, and actions that people can see.
No, thank you. I think, personally, I think that's really powerful because I think what you're saying is, it's easier to communicate, but that does not change the managerial challenge of what you're communicating, how you're doing it, and things like that. Just because we can connect easily on Teams isn't going to make communication easy. Exactly.
And it's one form of communication. I may be old school, I'm a baby boomer. There's no substitute for face-to-face communication. You can only get so far with Zoom or Teams to the extent, and that's why I travel extensively to get to the plants, to get to talk to people, to get to know them personally. I think is a really interpersonal communication is really important to building a culture.
Great. Well, let me start to go through some of the questions that our audience has put together here. And I think we've touched on some of them, but let me start on some that maybe we haven't. And this one will focus, I think, a little bit on your description of your own role and evolution as a manager, sort of asking, can you talk about the distinction of moving from the CFO role to more of the operational or CEO role? Are the same types of skills, or how did you have to expand those types of things? If you could let us know a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a huge transition, and I've said to other CEOs or those who are CEOs, people aspiring to be CEOs or who are COOs who will become CEOs, which is to say, nothing truly prepares you for being a CEO until you get into the chair. Everything changes. Your jokes are a little funnier to the people that you're working with. People write down stuff you say. You have friends you didn't know that you have. And I suspect that the converse is true when you step aside from the CEO role. But I think, all the cliches about a CEO is a lonely job and there isn't anybody else, it's kind of true. You've got your board. But with a CFO, if you've got a problem or a challenge or an issue or you need a resource, you walk into your boss's office, to your CEO's office to kick it around. With a CEO, you can kick it around with somebody, but ultimately the decision is with you. And so the sense of responsibility as a CEO versus a CFO is dramatic. I think, as a former CFO, your job is to make sure the balance sheet is protected. You're giving good financial projections to your leadership team, to your CEO, that the tools are there to make great decisions, which is what great CFOs do. We've got a fantastic CFO who joined us about a year and a half ago, who used to be at GE. And the tools that she's giving us, I mean, there's the basics, all the financial statements got to be ticked and tied, controls in a good place, audit, the controllership functions. But I think the value add for a good CFO is, what tools can you give me and our leadership team to make great decisions in terms of forecasting or real-time information? Obviously, with a CEO, you're talking about everything: strategy, managing the board, managing your shareholders, being an external voice for the company as well. So I think a large part of being a CEO, a big difference, is the externalities or the external representation of the company. But in addition to having ultimate responsibility for everything, certainly is the primary difference between a CEO and CFO. And I think that goes without saying.
Great. Let me ask you this one. So again, a key role of Cargill is, buying and the logistics in terms of, different food feedstocks and that. And so you alluded to the American farmer, but you also sort of serve farmers all around the world. And, in different points in the world, sometimes people talk about, are farmers on sort of subsistence wages or things like that? How do you think about those things at Cargill?
Yeah, I see the question from Hans, which I think is a good question, and I'm glad that you opened the door for me to address it. Do we see a moral imperative to pay higher prices to farmers? Cocoa. We're not in coffee. We're not in hazelnuts. We are in cocoa. And is it central to the discussion on supporting people and planet? Absolutely. And so when you think about sustainability, you think about inclusion, you think about feeding the people of the world, it absolutely starts with the farmer. And I'll tell you two different stories. One which was fairly recent, but the first is, we have something called the Cargill Cocoa Promise. So we are in the cocoa and chocolate business. I mentioned that. And the two leading producers of cocoa and chocolate in the world are in West Africa, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. So we implemented a program several years ago that said, if you follow these sustainability practices, it is responsible application of fertilizer or responsible use of dangerous tools in terms of harvesting your cocoa beans, or how you use water, we will pay you a premium for your cocoa. And I have been there several times and seen, for example, a lot of cocoa is grown through co-op system. The premium that we paid allowed a local village where the co-op was headquartered to build a doctor's office, a school, and a bank. Things that Westerners think are so fundamental to our own existence, which didn't exist prior to that initiative that we took. The second is we have something called the Black Farmer Equity Initiative. And we introduced a program whereby we pay a premium to Black cotton farmers for their product, independent of quality of product. I mean, obviously, there's got to be some standard of quality. But the fact is, from World War II, I think, to today, Black farmers represent today about 2% of this country's farmers. And then it represented 14%. So our view is we have an obligation, being in and we have a cotton business, to pay a premium to support the Black farming community so that they can build their ranks and have capital to reinvest. And I testified in front of Congress in April on the meat industry and took some I'll call it pointed questions from some representatives of that committee on why we would do such a thing. Is un-American, and I hope he gets sued, were the statements that were made. Quite the contrary. It's the right thing to do. It is completely consistent with our value system, and we do believe that supporting farmers, whether it's through pricing premiums or supporting them in terms of markets and having sustainable and small s relationships, is part of our value code and is part of our statement of purpose.
So thank you for sharing those couple examples. I think that they're really powerful. And you allude to a little bit of your discussion about talking to Congress and that about wanting to do the right thing. I know that you've, I think personally on behalf of Cargill, been an advocate for immigration. Do you want to talk maybe a little bit about that motivation and some of the key points you think are important there?
Yeah, we being privately owned, but also just by our own value system, we tend to take a lower profile on certain political issues because there's a lot of experts, whether it's, let's say it's tax policy, that, a lot of people can speak effectively about tax more effectively than we can. But the two issues where you will hear from us is on trade policy, as I said a while ago, on keeping borders open, on making sure food can get from where it's produced to where it is needed, in the case of the Black Sea region into Africa, for example, and immigration policy. And as I think anybody on this call would probably agree, this country has struggled to have efficient and effective immigration policy. But the fact is, American agriculture and American food production depends on a good and dependable immigration policy. And I mentioned we've had labor shortages in our beef plants, but not only because of COVID, but because of uncertain immigration policy. It has caused some supply chain disruptions. It has caused some price increases, but that's an area where we think the American food system depends on good and consistent immigration policy, and we have advocated for that previously.
Great. So, and to take us back to this global topic too, I think one of the questions that we have is, has the footprint of food, sort of local food production, so maybe not the changed over time and producing in certain regions or processing in certain regions, has that changed? And how do you think about those sort of dependencies?
Yeah, I think the localvore movement is an important one, and I think I am always trying to support local farmers, community-produced food whenever there's the opportunity. And when I travel around the country, you see promotion and support for locally produced food, which I think is important. But the fact is, it can't be all produced locally at scale. And so there's a couple of things. One is just sheer volumes. It has to be moved. It has to be transported. That you can't grow everything you need locally. You have to import it, whether it's from other states, across state borders, or from other countries. And then secondly is comparative advantage. Growing crops, growing products that are best suited to your soil and to your climate. So, here in Minnesota, you could grow oranges. Wouldn't be very good, not a long growing season. And it would be kind of stupid to grow oranges here, to use land for oranges instead of for, say, sugar beets, corn, wheat, or soy, alfalfa, the other products that are well suited to our climate here in Minnesota. But there's an example where grow what best suits. And that's why in the American Midwest, the farming industry has the proper soil, that the nutrition of the soil, the nutritious content of the soil in order to be able to grow the basic staples. And then you get into weather patterns, things like in California where fruit and vegetables are grown. I've always kind of scratched my head as to why the dairy industry is best suited to have such a large presence in California versus right next door in Wisconsin, given the strain that Californians have on their water supply. And also, agricultural production to feed dairy cattle. So I think the localvore movement, the locally produced movement, is a good one. It's an important one, but ultimately, the world's going to depend on interstate trade. This country's going to depend on interstate trade, and the world is going to depend on international trade in order for food production to meet where demand is most critical.
Great. Well, let me ask you one last question. And And that's this notion you alluded to. So as we potentially move to alternative forms of protein, like plant-based proteins, and we're substituting petroleum-based measures with plant, what's going to be required to, there's potentially a larger demand for these plant-based products. So is this going to be a big jump to scale, or is this going to be a gradual thing, or how's that going to work?
It's going to be gradual. And so we are involved in alternative protein. So we make pea-based protein. We make a plant-based patty that, again, we're not a brand company. We've got some brands, as I mentioned in the early parts of this conversation, but you're not going to see Cargill brand products, but you could go to a Target store, into their food section, and they have plant-based burgers or patties that we make for them for their private label. And as I said, we also supply pea protein and other products that go into plant-based products. I get the major ones are Impossible and Beyond. And we supply Beyond with ingredients, Beyond Meat. I think one of them we do and one of them we don't. As I said, I get the two confused. But I think it's going to be gradual. So I think we're projecting this couple of years. It'll be probably 5% of what is today the animal protein market. It's not going to change overnight, but it is going to be incremental over time. And ultimately, it's, I think consumers want the choice, and they want something that is sustainably produced, that tastes good, that feels similarly when they chew it to what, animal protein product does. But I think at the heart of your question, Myles, is ultimately about 94% of crops go into food, whether it's animal feed or human feed. 6% go into non-food. So whether it's bioindustrial products, but more importantly, the emerging space of biofuels. So things like biodiesel or ethanol, or which the audience has probably read a lot about, is sustainable aviation fuel. That's going to need to be a big part of the future for agriculture. So alternative forms of fuel, for example, we just opened up a facility in Europe which consumes used cooking oil from restaurants or hotels or wherever. That's the feedstock that then makes transportation fuels for the shipping and trucking industry, for example, so that we're not using as many petroleum products. So alternative proteins for consumption, but also agricultural products for energy feedstocks are going to be a major trend or theme in the ag industry in the years ahead.
Thank you. Well, I see that we're about at the top of the hour. So let me take a second to thank you, Dave. Thank you for taking the time, educating us a little bit on the global scope and the management challenges and strategies of running a company like Cargill, but also sort of highlighting, just the necessity to feed the world and the important role that farmers and companies like Cargill play in doing that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Myles. Cargill considers it a privilege to be in the business of nourishing the world. The farmers are our most important customers, but we take it very seriously, and we take it, as I said, as a privilege and an honor to be a company that's involved in agriculture and food production. So thanks for taking the time to listen to our views.
Great, and thank you all for joining us today.
Bye, everybody. Have a good Tuesday.